At first, Mara Ellison believed her sister had simply missed a train. Lena had done it before. She worked late, forgot the time, and sometimes disappeared into other people's problems so completely that she neglected her own. But 48 hours later, Mara stopped believing in ordinary explanations. At 28, Mara had built her life around control. She noticed details other people missed, kept emotions behind a disciplined exterior, and rarely trusted instinct without evidence. When it came to Lena, however, instinct was enough. Something was wrong. Lena Ellison was 24 and worked for a Portland nonprofit that helped women rebuild their lives after prison. She arranged temporary housing, job interviews, transportation, identification documents, and counseling appointments for women who often had nowhere else to go. The work mattered deeply to her, sometimes too deeply. On the evening she vanished, Lena had scheduled an appointment near Portland's old waterfront district. She never came home. Her phone stopped transmitting shortly after 9. Police initially treated the situation as a voluntary absence. Lena was an adult. There was no blood, no damaged vehicle, no witness reporting a struggle. Mara listened to every explanation and rejected all of them. Lena's medication was still inside the bathroom cabinet. Her passport remained in the kitchen drawer. A suitcase sat half-packed for a trip they had planned together later that month. People did not abandon their lives while leaving behind everything required to live them. The sisters had always been close, though grief had made that closeness more complicated. After their mother died, Mara became protective to the point of suffocation. Lena responded by becoming more private. Their love remained strong, but secrets had begun growing in the spaces between them. Now Mara started searching those spaces. She retraced Lena's final day, reviewed appointment calendars, receipts, emails, and transportation records. One pattern stood out. During the previous month, Lena had become unusually guarded about one case. Inside a locked drawer in Lena's desk, Mara found a small black notebook. The pages contained names, mostly women, former prisoners. Several had addresses beside them. Others had dates. 3 names were crossed out completely. Mara searched each one. All 3 women had disappeared within months of being released from the same state correctional facility in northern Maine. None had received significant media attention. None had powerful families demanding answers. And none had been officially connected to one another. That realization chilled Mara more than any evidence of violence could have. Lena had spent years helping women disappear from the prison system legally. Someone may have made her disappear, because she discovered where some of those women had actually gone. Near the end of the notebook, Mara found one final entry. No woman's name, no address, only 2 words. Cell 13. Visitor records showed Lena had traveled to the correctional facility 2 days before she vanished. Mara contacted the prison. Officials claimed there was no active inmate assigned to Cell 13. The answer came too quickly, too cleanly. Mara knew what avoidance looked like. That night, she searched Lena's cloud account one final time. A scheduled message appeared in a hidden folder. It had been written before Lena vanished. The warning contained only one instruction. If anything happened to her, Mara was supposed to find the prisoner in Cell 13. By the following morning, Mara was driving north through miles of pine forest toward the correctional facility Lena had visited before disappearing. The farther she traveled from Portland, the more isolated the landscape became. Cold mountain foothills rose beyond the trees, and eventually a gray concrete prison appeared behind fencing, watchtowers, and coils of razor wire. Mara had expected resistance. She had not expected denial. According to prison officials, the East Segregation Wing had been closed for years. Its cells ended at 12. There was no Cell 13. Yet Lena's note said otherwise. Mara requested visitor logs and quickly noticed inconsistencies. Lena's name appeared repeatedly over the previous 2 months. Some visits were listed on dates when outside access had supposedly been suspended. Others contained no inmate name at all. That should have been impossible. Warden Everett Shaw personally met with Mara. He was polished, measured, and widely praised for transforming the prison's rehabilitation programs. Newspaper articles displayed in the administrative hallway described declining violence, successful reentry initiatives, and Shaw's commitment to giving inmates second chances. At first, Mara understood why people trusted him. Then she compared his records with Lena's notebook. Almost nothing matched. Lena had documented visits that Shaw's office denied. Names disappeared between printed reports. Dates had been altered. Mara's suspicion deepened. A nervous records clerk eventually slipped an outdated architectural map into a folder Mara had already been given. The map showed something current blueprints did not. Behind cell 12 was an old service corridor running parallel to the segregation wing. At the corridor's far end sat one additional room. No modern label, only an original construction number. During a supervised tour, Mara noticed an outdated ventilation grill matching the map. She followed its direction through the wing until the route ended behind a reinforced steel door partly concealed by storage equipment. Faded paint remained visible beneath years of scratches. Someone had not removed the cell. They had removed it from the paperwork. Mara eventually found enough evidence inside Lena's copied records to identify the prisoner held there, Jonah Mercer, 41 years old, former investigative accountant, convicted of financial fraud. His prison file was strangely incomplete. Employment history missing. Transfer records deleted. Medical reports shortened to fragments. Even his booking photograph had been replaced in one database. Lena had visited him repeatedly. Jonah was physically exhausted, thin, and monitored far more heavily than an ordinary financial offender should have been. That alone told Mara something. Someone was afraid of what he knew. Documents Lena had copied from Jonah's records revealed the beginning of the answer. Former female inmates were being placed into rehabilitation programs after release. Then their identities changed. Addresses vanished. Social Security information was altered. Some women reappeared under different names hundreds of miles away. Others vanished completely. The pattern was horrifyingly precise. The prison had not simply lost track of vulnerable women. Someone may have been deliberately erasing them, and the women being selected shared one trait. Few had close relatives likely to keep searching. Mara finally understood why Lena had become obsessed. Her sister had discovered a system designed around the assumption that certain women could disappear without consequence. Before leaving the hidden corridor, Mara examined a bundle of papers Jonah had concealed behind a loose panel. Inside was a photograph. It showed Lena stepping into a black SUV near Portland's waterfront. The timestamp was unmistakable. 3 hours after police claimed her phone had gone dead, Lena Ellison was still alive. The photograph changed Mara's investigation completely. For the first time, she had proof that Lena had survived beyond the moment everyone assumed she disappeared. The black SUV became her next lead. Using toll camera records, archived registration data, and information hidden inside Jonah Mercer's accounting files, Mara traced the vehicle to a shell company registered under a nonprofit contractor connected to Warden Shaw's rehabilitation programs. On paper, the company helped former inmates transition back into society. In reality, almost nothing about it existed. Its listed office was empty. Its directors used temporary addresses. And one property kept appearing in old financial records. A rehabilitation lodge deep in the Maine forest. Lena's notebook contained the same address. Mara drove north until paved roads narrowed into gravel and the surrounding pine trees closed around her. The lodge stood beside a mountain lake, so still it reflected the gray sky like glass. It would have been beautiful under different circumstances. Instead, the isolation felt intentional. The building appeared abandoned. Windows were dusty. The parking lot was empty. But inside, Mara found signs that someone had been there recently. Fresh food packaging, medical supply wrappers, women's clothing in several different sizes. Then she found temporary identification cards, different photographs, different names. Some of those names matched the missing women from Lena's notebook. Mara finally understood what the lodge had been used for. It was not rehabilitation. It was a transition point. Women leaving prison arrived under one identity and left under another. Some had been pressured through unpaid debts. Others had histories of addiction that made them easier to discredit. Several had children and had been threatened with losing custody if they resisted. The system did not depend on physical force alone. It depended on finding women whose lives were already fragile enough to control. Lena had discovered the pattern while helping one former inmate apply for housing. The woman's documents had not matched her prison release file. Lena kept digging. Inside an office near the back of the lodge, Mara found evidence that her sister had been there. A camera memory card contained photographs of registration forms, transport schedules, and identity packets. Lena had been documenting everything before someone stopped her. Then Mara opened a narrow storage cabinet. Her stomach tightened. Inside lay Lena's watch. The glass was broken. There was dried blood along the strap. For several seconds, Mara could not breathe. Every terrible possibility she had refused to accept suddenly felt real. Then she found the surveillance backup. A damaged camera system had recorded the lodge's rear entrance. The footage showed Lena being moved out of the building alive. Weak, unsteady, but alive. Jonah's accounting records explained why the network existed. Clean identities were being manufactured, sold, and attached to women who could then be exploited through illegal labor, coercion, and criminal contracts. Ward and Shaw's reputation for rehabilitation suddenly looked less like public service and more like camouflage. Then Mara noticed a recurring name in the donor records. Harlan Ellison, her mother's brother, her estranged uncle. Mara had entered the forest looking for strangers who had hurt Lena. Instead, she found her own family name buried inside the operation. The final surveillance clip made the betrayal even worse. Lena was being escorted toward another vehicle, and the man walking beside her was Uncle Harlan. The surveillance image of Harlan Ellison beside Lena refused to leave Mara's mind. For years, she had believed her uncle simply abandoned the family after Evelyn Ellison died. Now she had to consider something worse. Maybe he had never really left. Harlan had built one of New England's most successful logistics companies, moving freight, medical supplies, and private contracts across several states. His public reputation was polished by charitable donations, prison reentry programs, and criminal justice reform initiatives. It was exactly the kind of image Warden Everett Shaw had cultivated. Mara refused to confront him without proof. Instead, she followed the companies. Shell corporations connected to Harlan's logistics network had transported rehabilitation clients between prisons, treatment centers, and temporary housing facilities for years. Several payments led directly back to Shaw. Others disappeared through nonprofits with no real staff. The deeper Mara searched, the more her family history changed. Her mother, Evelyn, had once handled compliance for Harlan's company. Years earlier, she had discovered transport records that did not match passenger identities. Some routes listed women who officially had never traveled. Others showed inmates being moved after release under entirely different names. Evelyn had started documenting the discrepancies. Then she died. The accident that had shattered Mara and Lena's childhood suddenly looked less accidental. Mara followed Lena's copied documents to Harlan's Riverside estate in New Hampshire. Behind the elegant Maine house stood an older warehouse overlooking a broad, slow-moving river. Inside, Mara found what looked like abandoned business storage. It was anything but ordinary. Archived employee records filled metal cabinets. Identity packets were organized by date. Transport logs matched names from Lena's notebook. Then Mara found a folder bearing Evelyn's initials. Lena had not only been investigating missing women, she had been investigating their mother. That realization cut deeper than anything Mara had found so far. Lena had known enough to suspect Evelyn's death and had kept it secret. Harlan's records revealed that he had discovered Lena's investigation months earlier. At first, he had pressured her to stop. He had blocked access to files, canceled meetings, and attempted to frighten her away from the company. Mara believed she finally understood why. Then she found a recovered security recording. The footage showed the night Lena was taken from a forest lodge. Harlan was there, but he was not handing her over. He was moving her away from Shaw's men. The truth became harder to categorize. Harlan had participated in the system. His companies had carried people through it. His money had helped sustain it. But at some point, he had begun secretly collecting evidence against the same network. The uncle Mara believed had taken Lena might actually have been the last person who tried to keep her alive. That did not make him innocent. It made the conspiracy larger. Inside a locked drawer, Mara found detailed notes on Shaw's transfers, offshore payments, and hidden facilities. Harlan had been building his own case. One document stood apart from the rest. A map. It marked a secluded women's medical facility in the White Mountains. Beside the location was Lena Ellison's name, and next to it was a transfer date from 6 days earlier. By the time Mara reached the White Mountains, heavy snow had nearly erased the road behind her. The private recovery center sat beyond a narrow mountain pass, surrounded by white pines and steep slopes that made isolation feel less accidental and more strategic. On paper, the facility treated women recovering from trauma, addiction, and incarceration. Jonah Mercer's files told another story. The center was tied to the same network of shell companies connected to Warden Everett Shaw. Mara entered using copy credentials and followed the administrative records before anyone could question her presence. The first file she found made the pattern impossible to deny. Several women from Lena's notebook had been admitted under false names. Their birth dates had been changed. Emergency contacts had been removed. Release histories had been rewritten. Some documents made them appear homeless. Others suggested they had voluntarily cut ties with their families. The paperwork did more than hide them. It made searching for them legally difficult. Mara began to understand why the system had survived for so long. The network targeted women already likely to be overlooked. Poor women, women struggling with addiction, former inmates, women of color whose disappearances had too often received less urgency from institutions meant to protect them. The conspiracy did not create society's indifference. It exploited it. That realization made Mara sick. The women were not invisible. Someone had simply calculated how long it would take before anyone powerful noticed they were gone. Lena had noticed. Records showed she had tried to help several women escape the facility. She gathered copied testimony, payment logs, intake forms, and transport records strong enough to expose the entire network. That was when Shaw ordered her moved. Harlan had tried to intercept the transfer. He failed. Mara's anger toward her uncle became harder to define. Harlan had helped build the logistics system that made the operation possible. Maybe he had not understood what it would become at first, but he had profited long enough without asking the questions Evelyn had once asked. His later attempts to undo the damage did not erase that responsibility. Mara found a treatment room where Lena had last been held. The bed was empty. The restraints had been removed. The walls were clean enough to suggest someone had already begun erasing evidence. Then Mara checked beneath a wooden desk. A small symbol had been scratched into the surface. 3 curved lines inside a circle. Mara recognized it instantly. When they were children, Lena used the symbol to mark places she wanted Mara to find during games along the Maine coast. It meant one thing. Follow me. Lena had been conscious. She had known Mara might come, and she had left a trail. Before Mara could search further, headlights appeared through the snowfall. Multiple vehicles. Shaw's private security. They were not arriving to protect patients. They were coming to erase what remained. Mara copied as many records as she could, took several patient files, and escaped through a service exit before the building was sealed. Inside the recovered documents was one final transfer sheet. Lena had been moved again. Her destination was a decommissioned coastal detention complex known locally as Blackwater Point. Before Mara could move toward Blackwater Point, she returned to the evidence connected to Jonah Mercer. For the first time, the pieces aligned. Jonah had once worked as an investigative accountant for Harlan Ellison's logistics group. Years earlier, he discovered payments that should never have existed. Money moved from private contractors to prison administrators, from transport companies to judges, from rehabilitation nonprofits to identity brokers. And behind many of those transactions sat the same names Mara had been following since Lena vanished. Warden Everett Shaw was only one part of it. Jonah had tried to expose the network. Instead, financial records were altered to make him look responsible for fraud. He was convicted. Then he disappeared into cell 13. Mara finally understood why. The hidden cell was not simply a place to punish one prisoner. It was an unofficial holding location for people who knew too much, but were too dangerous to eliminate openly. Keeping them alive protected the conspiracy from suspicious deaths. Keeping them off the official record made them nearly impossible to find. The safest place to hide a secret was not somewhere nobody could reach. It was inside paperwork everyone assumed was already true. Lena had discovered Jonah because one of the missing women mentioned his name shortly before disappearing. From there, Jonah helped her map the network. Facilities, payments, transfers, fake identities, people in positions of authority who had learned exactly how to make vulnerable women vanish without creating alarms. Mara understood something else. Lena had left breadcrumbs deliberately. The notebook, the symbol beneath the desk, the cloud message. She had known Mara well enough to trust that she would recognize patterns others ignored. That realization brought pride and fear in equal measure. The files also contained names tied to local law enforcement and government offices. Mara could no longer assume every federal or state contact would protect the evidence. So before leaving, she encrypted copies and sent them to several independent recipients: a journalist, an attorney, a national advocacy organization. If someone tried to erase the case, too many people would already possess it. Then Mara drove toward Blackwater Point. The weather worsened as she reached the Maine coast. Atlantic wind tore across the cliffs, and rain turned the narrow road slick beneath her tires. The abandoned detention complex rose above the ocean like something the coastline had tried to forget. It had once housed juvenile offenders before structural damage forced it closed. Below the main building, sea caves cut beneath the cliffs toward an old service dock. Mara was approaching the outer fence when another vehicle arrived. Harlan, his presence immediately raised every instinct she had learned not to ignore. But his record showed he had been following Lena's transfers independently. He had reached the same conclusion. Shaw was preparing to move the remaining witnesses out by boat before investigators could arrive. Mara did not forgive Harlan. She did not trust him. But for the next few hours, they wanted the same thing. Lena alive. From the cliff above the detention complex, Mara saw movement below. A transport boat was pulling away from the hidden dock. Rain blurred the windows. Then lightning illuminated one face inside. Lena was alive. Mara saw Lena through the rain-streaked boat window and moved before fear could stop her. The old facility map showed a maintenance tunnel leading from the upper detention block toward the hidden dock below the cliffs. She ran for it. The Atlantic storm had turned the sea violent enough to slow the transport boat near the rocks. Waves slammed against the dock, forcing Shaw's men to struggle with ropes and equipment instead of leaving immediately. Harlan reached the lower gate first. Using access codes tied to his former logistics contracts, he disabled the locking system and opened the passage. For Mara, it did not erase what he had done, but it proved he was finally willing to destroy part of the machine he had helped build. At the dock, Lena was not alone. Several women were being moved beside her. Some Mara recognized from Lena's notebook. Others she had only seen in falsified medical records. They were exhausted, frightened, and guarded like cargo. Lena looked thinner than Mara remembered. Her face was pale. One arm was bruised, but she was conscious, still watching, still resisting. Elsewhere, the conspiracy had already begun collapsing. The encrypted files Mara sent were reaching journalists, attorneys, advocacy groups, and outside investigators at the same time. That made containment impossible. Documents now showed that Shaw had controlled the prison side of the operation, selecting vulnerable women and manipulating release records. But he had never acted alone. Several of Harlan's former business partners had controlled transportation, shell companies, false identities, and payment channels. Old contracts prove Harlan had seen warning signs years earlier. He ignored them because the business was profitable. Later guilt did not erase that choice. Mara understood that now. There were no clean heroes inside the conspiracy. Only people who made different choices when the truth finally became impossible to ignore. Her priority was Lena, and every woman beside her. Before the boat could leave, emergency lights appeared beyond the cliffs. Coast Guard units approached from the water. Federal vehicles moved toward the upper compound. Shaw responded by attempting to destroy what remained. Smoke rose from beneath the detention complex. The old archive wing had been set on fire. Flames spread through damaged corridors while rain hammered the roof. Mara reached the dock during confusion. When she finally got to Lena, the weeks of searching collapsed into one unbearable moment. Lena was alive. That was enough. The women were moved away from the burning facility as investigators surrounded Blackwater Point. Shaw was taken into custody before he could disappear. Harlan did not run. He surrendered knowing the records would expose his own part in the operation. Only after Lena reached medical care did Mara learn she had protected one final piece of evidence, a tiny memory card hidden inside the lining of her clothing. It contained testimonies, financial records, names, transfers, proof powerful enough to finish what the women had started. Mara had spent the entire investigation trying to save one sister. Lena had risked everything because dozens of other women had no sisters left to search for them. Then Mara opened the final folder on the card. The file name made her blood turn cold. Evelyn Ellison, Witness 1. Several months after Blackwater Point, the Maine coast looked almost peaceful again. Lena recovered in a small lighthouse cottage overlooking the Atlantic, close enough to Mara that neither sister had to wonder where the other was. For the first time in years, silence between them no longer felt dangerous. The investigation had spread far beyond Maine. Evidence recovered from Blackwater Point exposed failures across prisons, private contractors, logistics companies, rehabilitation programs, and public offices. Several missing women were identified. Some families finally learned what had happened to daughters, and sisters, they've been told, had simply disappeared by choice. Jonah Mercer's conviction entered formal review after financial records proved he had been framed. Warden Everett Shaw and several associates faced prosecution. Harlan Ellison faced charges too. His later cooperation mattered. But it did not erase the years he had profited from contracts he should have questioned. Mara accepted that truth without simplifying him into either monster or victim. Then came the file, labeled with their mother's name. Evelyn Ellison had discovered the operation years earlier, when it was still small enough to hide behind legitimate transportation contracts. She had copied financial records, tracked unusual prisoner transfers, documented the first woman who vanished after release. Then she confronted Harlan. That was when everything changed. Evelyn's death had never been an accident. One of Shaw's earliest business partners arranged it before she could expose the network. Harlan knew she had been threatened. He could have helped. Instead, he stayed silent because revealing what Evelyn knew would also have exposed his own financial misconduct. His silence saved his company. It cost his sister her life. Years later, Lena discovered fragments of those same records. That was why she began working with former inmates, not by coincidence. Not only because she cared about rehabilitation. She had been continuing Evelyn's unfinished investigation. She kept Mara outside it because she believed secrecy would keep her safe. That truth hurt Mara in a different way. Her mother had hidden danger from her. Lena had done the same. Both had called it protection. Mara finally understood that love built on silence could still leave damage behind. So the sisters made a different choice. No more hidden files. No more private warnings. No more carrying dangerous truths alone. Mara began working with survivors and attorneys to build an independent legal support foundation for women leaving prison. Lena, once physically ready, agreed to testify publicly. Their relationship became stronger not because the past disappeared, but because nothing important was being hidden anymore. Mara finally understood why Lena had vanished. It was never simply because she went too far. She disappeared because she found the truth powerful people had spent years erasing, and she refused to accept that forgotten women were supposed to stay forgotten. Months later, Mara returned to the cottage after a morning meeting and found an unmarked envelope beneath the door. Inside was a photograph of another correctional facility. No return address. No explanation. On the back, someone had written only 2 words. Cell 14.